Hello audio geeks and sonic freaks, welcome to my fourth video for my open fund project to put a producer's portfolio together. I'd like to thank Creative Scotland for supporting this project. Today I'm going to be talking about how I set up and use my effects. I'm using Cubase Pro 11, but this video will be useful for anyone using effects, and I'm going to be assuming a basic understanding of the jargon and terminology. I have a Cubase project open here that I produced for a fantastic local band from Paisley called Subtopian Planning Board. The first thing I'm going to go over very quickly is the difference between insert and send effects. So an insert effect runs in series with the original signal. So that means that whatever you put into the effect gets completely altered by the effect and comes out the other end that way. A classic example of an insert effect is a compressor. Whereas a send effect runs in parallel with the original signal. So if you're using a reverb, for example, you'll have the original signal, and running parallel to that, you'll have the signal with the reverb applied to it, and you can choose how much of the original signal is sent to the reverb and control the volume of it that way. Whereas if you were using a reverb as an insert effect, it would only output the signal with the reverb applied to it, so it would be completely wet. So let's take a very quick look at how I set up my send effects. If I press F4, it's going to bring up this page here, audio connections. I've got my inputs, I've only got 2 activated at the moment. Outputs, I've got 2 sets of stereo outputs activated. The reason I do this is because oftentimes I want to route my send effects to different channels on my mixing desk. So you can see my main outs are going to 1 and 2. And then my send effects are going to 3 and 4. I can mute channels 1 and 2 on my desk so that I'm only hearing the reverb. And this is quite important with reverbs because you're going to want to notch out various frequencies in your reverbs, and that will bring more clarity to your mixes. Now there are other ways to do this in Cubase. You can click on Studio and go to Control Room, which I've not got enabled at the moment, but if you had it enabled, you'd be able to reroute your send effects that way and do it a different way. I prefer to just have it set up with my mixer desk. I can just reach over and turn on and turn off whatever I want to do. Now let's quickly go back into that page again by pressing F4. Just to show you, I've got my groups set up here. What I like to do is group my families of instruments together so I can treat them all as a group. Obviously, like my vocal group, all the vocals are going in there and I can EQ them together. Same with the guitars and the drums or whatever effects I'm applying. When you apply effects to groups and EQ, it gives you a little bit more cohesion. So let's close this now. I have a shortcut set up for my plugin manager in Cubase. You can set up shortcuts under key commands. If I press Ctrl-Shift-Space, that's going to bring up my plugin manager. Very quickly, I'm just going to click on the Instruments tabs, and I've organised the instruments that I have into groups that I've specified and just put them in folders that relate to each other. So it's the same with my VST effects. I spent quite a lot of time grouping my plugins together, and that's what I'm going to go over today. I'm going to talk about how I group them, and I'm going to talk about each group of effects as I see it to the best of my knowledge. And if you've got any comments, you disagree, agree, you like what I've done here, you've got any tips for me, please do leave me a comment and let's get some geek conversation going. I'm running a 64-bit system here. This first folder is actually not supposed to be here anymore. I'm finished with that, it's empty. Let's delete that. So now the first folder is bridged. These are the few 32-bit plugins that I felt I just could not live without. So there's 2 ways I can use those in a 64-bit system. One is using Meta plugin, and the other one was by installing a program called JBridge, which I think only costs €15 or so, and I managed to get my favourite 32-bit plugins working. So these are not grouped by type, these are just all 32-bit plugins. Channel strips, for those of you that don't know, are, if you imagine a channel on a mixer, you can have inserts plugged into that, you've got your EQ. It varies slightly from desk to desk, but essentially they will simulate that model of channel strip. I'm not going to open one of these just now. Got all my different compressors here. My favourite ones are at the top. SSL Comp Stereo, I can't open it from this window, maybe I'll just open it from here. If I were to open it, SSL Comp Stereo. This is one of my favourite compressors. It's supposed to be a mastering compressor, but I use it for quite a lot of different things. It's got a nice smooth sound, it's fairly transparent, it does dull the signal very slightly, so you need to compensate for that with EQ, but that's normal for a compressor. Now I can also look at this folder from here. The CLA compressors are really popular, I think, mostly in rock and indie music. They do colour the sound a lot more than the SSL compressor does. H-Comp, I like to use that for vocal groups, and V-Comp is quite good for backing vocals. That's a kind of rough rule. It doesn't always work out that way. It just depends on the characteristics of the individual track or group that you're applying the compressor to. Multiband and ducking folder, I've combined my multiband compressors together here. So if I was to open C4 for example, the difference between a multiband compressor and a regular compressor is that you can apply different levels of compression to different frequency ranges. I really like using this particular multiband compressor on bass, and ducking compressors are called ducking compressors because what happens is the signal will duck on particular beat. So like in dance music, you'll have a bass drum and a synth that goes so every time that kick drum hits, the synth sound ducks. So these ducking compressors can simulate that. And there's other ways to do that with side chaining. If you want to know about side chaining, have a little look for yourself online. Now I have limiters and expanders. Limiters are similar to compressors, except that as they compress the signal, you get a flat line on your maximum level, no argument. So these are used mostly in mastering. It's kind of a rule of thumb that limiters should only be used on a master channel, because if you've got a limiter on one of your individual tracks and that eventually gets to the master channel and that's got a limiter on it, you'll get too much squashing. My favourite limiter is LL Ultra Stereo. So I've got it kind of set up to wideband arc here. This is my default setting that I've chosen, that I usually start with when I'm using L3 LL Ultra. And your expanders in the same group are the opposite. So where a compressor reduces the amount of dynamics by cutting the loudest signals and boosting the quietest signals, an expander does the opposite of that to give more expression. Now we are going to look at gates. There's some very interesting gates. I do like gates. The classic use of a gate is a noise gate, so that eliminates background noise when nothing's going on in a track. But you've got to be very careful with those kind of gates because they can cut off the beginning and end of signals not quite where you want them to. It might be, for example, on a kick drum that's just going on for a little bit too long, so I might use a gate just to clip off the end of each kick drum. Another interesting kind of gate is a trigger gate. I think I'll actually show you what this sounds like, so let me bypass it. Now I'm going to just solo the vocals here. There is a lot of delay effect on the vocal, so when I stop playing you're going to hear that's going to keep going.
Tell me your stories.
Okay, now if I apply the trigger gate, that's a rhythmical gate, so it cuts out at regular intervals that relate to the tempo of the track. So
Tell me your
Okay, it doesn't sound great on this vocal, but it can be fantastic for a lot of things. A1 Trigger Gate is a free plugin, so download that if you're looking for a nice auto gate. My next folder is Enhancers and Exciters. So I always think that these are quite similar to EQs. The difference, as far as I understand, is that an exciter does not necessarily apply to a particular band of frequencies, but it applies itself to harmonics of the original signal. So if you've got a piano part, for example, you're playing in C and you want to excite the high frequencies, it's going to excite the frequencies that relate to that particular scale. And then what I call enhancers are essentially EQs, but they don't look like EQs. So this is one of my favourite enhancers. It's quite simple to use. Oftentimes when I'm working on a mix, there's a particular element that it just sounds a little bit like too much of maybe a frequency band that I want to remove. I could notch it out, but this Triple D by Manny M has got a really nice way of subtly cutting out those signals with a nice kind of character. I can't quite put my finger on it, but it's real nice. So let's do this again with the vocals. We'll do the De-Esser. If I turn this dial up, you can hear that the S's are disappearing. You can see it shows you how much it's reducing the S's by. So your S's are your high band frequencies. Your D-Boxy is more like lower range, maybe 100, 200 Hertz. And then D-Harsher is going to be about 1K, 2K, I'm guessing. But you can actually adjust the frequency. It doesn't tell you what the frequency is, it just gives you a number from 0 to 100. And the other really interesting thing that this plugin has, that a lot of plugins have, is you click this button and you just hear what you're cutting out. So that's showing you what's been removed. Really, really nice plugin by Waves Audio there. Now we can go into the next folder. These are all my EQs. I have to mention that stock EQs and stock plugins are not nearly as good as the plugins you can get online by people who specifically make plugins. Obviously Steinberg have got some really, really useful plugins here in Cubase. Some of them are pretty good, but you cannot compare a Steinberg plugin to a Waves plugin for the most part. Looking at these EQs here, I really do like the GEQ Classic. I use that on my master tracks. I'm not an expert at mastering, I can do okay. It gives you a visual representation, which is kind of handy when you're trying to boost or cut a certain frequency. I've got to say, the latest version of the QEQs is far superior to the previous versions. Okay, it looks nicer, but it seems to just sound a lot smoother. Obviously, if I click on my edit button up here, I can see the EQ that I've applied from Steinberg's Cubase to this track, and I've got my low cut filter up quite high on this female vocal. I love filters. This is a fantastic free filter. I'm going to load up Pan Smooth, and I'm going to actually change that to a filter because it's a nice shape. So watch this.
Tell me your stories. I'm listening now. I'm listening now.
Very, very nice free filter by Tal Togu Audio. Filters aren't always moving like that, they can be fixed at certain frequencies. So if we're to open this one up,
Tell me your story. I'm listening now. I'm listening now.
that's another free filter by GVST. There are some other filters in here that I really like, but I don't want to spend a long time on this. I love applying filters to delays, so I might have a delay as a send effect, and have some sort of filter on it after. I've got all my vocal strips here. I don't use these so much anymore. I used to quite like to use Butch Vig vocals on vocals. They were quite good for that, but there's something else that I prefer now, also from Waves, which is Shep's parallel particles. This really subtly colours whatever you're putting through it. It's quite nice. Let's give it a quick blast.
Tell me your story.
It gives you a bit of analog warmth.
I'm listening now.
We don't need this here. It's just so you can hear it. And it gives you a nice visual representation of how much you're colouring. It's really nice for, like, if you're finishing off your vocals, it can just give it that bit of extra colour that you feel is missing. That was back in Enhancers. We were talking about my vocal channels here. I also have my Harmonisers in there. This is one by Antares Tech. And I just load it up, press space.
I believe.
So that's without doing anything at all. I've grouped those together with my formants and my microphone strips. So a formant, for example, just changed the vowel sound, so O, I, O. So this is a very simple free formant by GVST again, called G-Form. Let's go down the bottom here. So it's kind of changing from an ooh to an ah sound. That's essentially what Formant plugins do. So please do, again, leave me comments if you want to talk about anything in depth. I'm so enthusiastic about these things. I don't know if it's coming across. I'm not entirely sure what exactly to do with this video. I mean, I just wanted to run through my effects groupings and kind of tell you how and why I've grouped them together. So that was the vocal formant group. Again, relating to vocals a lot. I've got my De-Essers in here, and I have my envelopes in here. Envelopes are very different to De-Essers. They're triggered by audio. Then I have my pitch shift and autotune. I do use Autotune Pro by Antares quite a lot. I use it very subtly and only when it's absolutely necessary. There are some great pitch shifters by Waves. They're fairly transparent. It's good to use pitch shifters in conjunction with formants actually. So let's just bring up that G-form again and you will see why.
I believe.
Now her voice sounds a bit artificial until I adjust the formant. Sounds a bit more natural. Okay, so that's playing around. Pitch shifters, use them together with formants, that's a good tip. Now we're going on to guitar, bass, drums and keyboard strips. I'm not going to say very much about those. Those are kind of like the vocal strips, except they're catered towards those particular instruments, although there's a bit of flexibility. It depends how much you want to experiment. This is a really nice plugin if your acoustic guitars are a bit dull. It can be a little bit harsh. You've got two different options, but Maserati ACG, I'm using that on a lot of acoustic guitars these days. And now I have my amp simulators, which are just as they sound, and I've grouped my overdrive and distortion pedals together. We all know what that is. Your saturation effects are going to emulate what happens if you put a very high gain signal into the channel of a mixer or into some sort of analog recording device. When you clip the signal in analog devices, you get this natural, subtle warmth. It's just verging on overdrive, and that's what they call saturation. I really do like this saturation plugin here. I'll use it particularly on strings, but I'll let you hear a little bit of Red 17.
Tell me your stories. I'm listening now. I'm listening always.
You know, when you pump that dial right up, it does essentially become an overdrive effect. Crush is a great free plugin. It's not really a saturation plugin by any means, but it's got some nice overdrive. It's got some bit crushing and some Some weird effects here that emulate kind of digital degradation, if I can say that word. Really, really nice plugin. I'm not going to mess around with it just now, but you'll get it for free. Tritix Crush. I've got my tape and vinyl emulators and my restore plugins. So you've got things that are supposed to reduce noise and clicks and pops at the bottom here. Then, for example, Kramer tape. So we're making our way to the bottom. I've got my degraders and ring modulators. I have never really figured out what is the deal with ring modulators. I've never loaded up a ring modulator and gone, wow, I really, really like the sound of that. So if any of you have managed to use a ring modulator successfully, please let me know what you've used it for, because I'm just like, what is the point of this? It doesn't really matter how much I play around with it, I'm not really going to like it. But I do quite like using bit crushers. In this track I've used them on the guitar part, so this bar 39 to 41 has not got the bit crusher on it, but this ramp here in my automation, as that ramps up you're going to hear the bit crusher come in, and I'm getting that from this free plugin called Gorgon, which is a distortion and bit crushing plugin that is free. It's a really nice plugin as well, so I'm giving you all my favourite free plugins today. I'm letting you know what they are. It's all my favourite effect secrets. Let's have a little listen to this bit crushing. So watch the ramp here. So you're going to want to hear that in context. It gives it just that little bit of sparkle. I really like that, and I hope you do too. If you don't like it, tell me why, and you better have a really, really good reason. So let's go back to this vocal and see where we are in my list here. We're now moving into my modulation set, but I think I've talked a bit too much already. I'm not going to go into detail about choruses and doublers. Flangers and phasers, again very closely related to each other, although they do have different characteristics. One of my favourite free flangers is definitely this one by Dead Duck. It's just the DD flanger. You can get a free pack if you just look up Dead Duck VST effects online. I will often put that after a delay. Under my modulation effects, which are my chorus, my doublers, my flangers and my phasers. Then I've just got my multi effects and my random effects. Delays are definitely my favourite group of effects. We've heard some delays already, so I don't need to go into what they sound like, but I'm going to tell you about a couple of my favourite delay effects. So again, Manny M. This is not a free plugin, but it's a great delay. It's very nice sounding, it's easy to use, and it gives you some extra options integrated into the delay: reverb, distortion, doubler and a phaser. And then the Togo Audio, that's the TAL ones. These are some great free delay effects, especially if you're into like dub style delays as I am. Now we're into our reverbs. I've got quite a lot of reverbs as well. I've really got the hang of long reverbs, but something I've not got the hang of yet is really short reverbs, and making something really wet with a short reverb to create a kind of atmosphere that you don't even realise is coming from a reverb. You know, you can push something right back into the mix with a really short reverb. That's something I've yet to explore. Again, the Togo Audio ones are free. Tal Reverb 4 is definitely their best one. Some are more complicated, some are more simple. This one knob wetter is just exactly what it sounds like.
I'm listening now, I'm listening always.
Or if you were to pull up R-Verb, that gets a fair bit more complicated. You've got quite a lot more options with all these dials here, and your EQ and your damping, and You know, there's all different sections to this reverb, but it is a very, very nice sounding reverb. Again, this is one I like to use on string sections. I do love a good tremolo auto pan effect. Here's a fantastic free tremolo effect called pitching tremolo. So if I was to go for the square shape, it's almost completely square. That is what like an auto gate does. So
Your stories, I'm listening now. I'm listening always. Tell me
you can smooth it out.
your stories.
Now your auto pans are not going to work on mono tracks. So if I go into my vocal group here and I were to add an auto pan to that, you're going to hear all the vocals move around in the headphones if you're wearing them. Let's sync it up. You can follow the vocals. Let's make them a bit wider. Yeah. Auto pans are really good on synth parts sometimes. I don't know, what do you use auto pan for? White noise? Great on white noise. We're just going to finish up with this folder here. I'm not going to go into utilities and meters and the plugins that I don't use. Stereoizers can be pretty cool. I'm going to show you how I make a mono signal into a stereo signal. I've got a track set up here with a synth on it. I'm just going to bypass these because I've got it all lined up here. So, without any effects. Now, if I unbypass this mono to stereo, it's just making it a bit wider. That's a stock plugin from Steinberg Cubase. I find that I don't want to push that too much. It doesn't sound great when you push it out too much in this, so I'll push it out a little bit with this, then I might use S1 Imager as I have here to widen it further again. So switch this on now. Here it's spread out to the sides quite nicely. So that's all I'm really going to say about widening a signal, and I think that is all I'm going to say about my plugins. I hope this has not been boring for you. I've never made a video blog like this before, so please do feel free to engage with me. Give me a thumbs down, I might deserve it, or maybe I deserve a thumbs up, I really don't know.